Wrestling with Angels. We also have his earlier book here, Twice a False Messiah, and when he's done, books will be for sale, and both of our readers will be happy to sign them. So,
Okay.
welcome, Daniel.
Thanks, Dave. We are here to focus on Wrestling with Angels, but if you don't know about Twice a False Messiah, this is your chance. It follows two guys up the Nile River in search of the true name of God. They find some interesting things. Check that out. But Wrestling with Angels, a collection of 18 short stories gathered over 3 decades, set in countries around the world. If you get as far as the table of contents, you will see that it's laid out like a record. You've got an A side, a B side, and a bonus track. The A side, that's where you put your heaviest stuff you want right out there for the reader to hear. That's called border stories. And every one of the stories in there has the characters dealing with borders, confronted by borders, crossing borders, borders between people, borders between places and things, all kinds of different stuff like that. And I just wanted to read out the very beginning of one of the stories from Border Stories called In the House of Mr. Pooh. On the morning after the new moon, there were no lodgers in the house of Mr. Pooh. There was a body under the back steps, but the body was dead. It had never lodged in any formal sense with Mr. Pooh. It had washed up on the beach sometime during the night and been removed from public view by Mrs. Pooh, a wiry, graying woman of great age and determination. At first, Mr. Pooh had been inclined to leave the body where it was, along the fringe of sand, and give the whole matter over to the authorities. Mr. Pooh was not given to extraordinary exertions. He had stood in the sand, musing in an unsettled way about the proper fate for a washed-up European body, particularly that of an adolescent unknown to the island, when Mrs. Pooh had pointed out the red, twisted markings on the boy's neck that indicated death by more deliberate means. Mr. Pooh had scratched at his stomach and spat a line of beetle juice into the sand. There could be no further talk of involving the authorities. The current climate of sentiment against the Chinese ensured that the very knowledge of a murdered European on the island, for what else could the neck markings mean, would be taken as a sign of criminal infiltration by the family Pooh. Rumblings had been growing of late on the island. Wild tales of tongue war and drug running that bore less relation to the quiet, settled world of the landlord's Pooh than to the last set of martial arts films imported from Hong Kong and shown against a sheet hung between 2 trees outside Suvendra's grocery store and bicycle repair. There were no other Chinese on the island with whom the Poohs might have initiated such a tongue war. Indeed, the nearest Chinese community of size was on the mainland at Hat Yai, and neither of the Poohs had been there since the war. But it was the very irrationality of the claims that gave them credence, as it matched the islanders' growing confusion over their own expendability in the combat with modern market forces. Still, rumblings or not, the body was there, well out of sight from the house or any passers-by, but there nonetheless. It was evident that something must be done. Mr. Pooh announced as much to his wife, and then, with a yawn, decided to think matters over properly and retired to the wooden platform under the shaded veranda of the house. Mrs. Pooh listened submissively to her husband's advice, and then, after he padded off, dragged the body with great effort between 2 garden hose, up off the beach, across the patchy yard littered with browning palm fronds and an upturned dugout canoe, to the steps behind the house, where she stowed it carefully out of sight beneath 2 gunny sacks and a length of tarpaulin. Mr. Pooh knew nothing of this. He lay, as was his wont, lengthwise on the wooden platform, and watched the swell and dip of the waves that dodged past the western end of the reef and slid safely home to die on the shores of his beach. Mr. Pooh was a quiet, elderly fellow with a scalp so bald that the isolated tufts of white hair merely accented its nakedness. Left to himself, he might not move for hours or even days, but in company he was a very smiley man. It was difficult to tell if he had any teeth, even when he smiled, for as his mouth held the clotted, blood-stained mess that marked the final stages of betel nut addiction. It was a happy, vacant smile, as big as Mr. Pooh was small, though he possessed a pot belly of which he was enormously proud. He lay then, on the morning after the new moon, rubbing his belly affectionately and not thinking about the dead body which had been dragged up the beach to rest behind his house. He was thinking instead about money, and the remote chance of getting any, and whether it was possible that Suvendra's credit ledger might ever be mislaid. Mrs. Pooh was working over the wash basin in the backyard with a dim sense of impending trouble when the sound of voices came through the palm thickets along the path to town. They were European voices, and her first thought naturally was of the body. Mr. Pooh's first thought was of lodgers, and he patted his belly at the thought of business at hand. He sat up, yawning, and waited for the voices. That's all we get out of that. But trouble arrives with those voices. You have to see what the Poohs are able to do with it. All the stories in border stories are set, as I said, in different countries. The B-side is called Shifting Gears. The B-side, that's where you throw in something that they haven't heard before. Maybe you put the instrumental in there, you bring in a second vocalist, something like that. So in Shifting Gears, we have stories that take place from different points of view, in different places, at different time periods. There's a story set in 2000 BC and another one that features the devil in the 1930s and so on. But I'm just going to read actually the entire piece of a very short piece called Jumping Off. Saturday in the rain, with heavy sluices of water running off my feet and the tired clop of 4 sodden shoes squishing along the sidewalk. Grandfather silent. Grandfather bundled inside his squeaking raincoat, bent under a brown cloth cap. Grandfather's hand tucked inside my arm, mottled skin and thin curling hairs along the knuckle where he grips, firm and trusting. Even in the rain, he wears the sunglasses. Squish, slop, squish, slop. Up another set of steps, onto the water-soaked welcome mat, ring the bell and wait. Smiles, fixed, tight smiles. Me to say hello ma'am or hello is the lady of the house at home. Grandfather to start the pitch. In the rain, no one asks us in. My box grows heavy, cardboard wettening even under wraps and seeping like an infection down into the tight-packed goods. Christmas wrapping already in August. Some buy early, says Grandfather. Some wait just for me. Down the steps, along the boulevard. Squish, slop, squish. My arm growing numb. Baseball hat dripping rain off the bill and tightening along my forehead. Grandfather tall but stooping. Faint smell of cheese clinging to his shirt, but covered now under the raincoat, and the soft hiss of water sliding over the grass. Gutters run with waste and leaves. A car splashes past. Up another set of steps. Ring the bell, smiling. Is the lady of the house at home? The pitch. 2 dishcloths and a pot holder. Are you really blind, she says. Down the steps, along the street. Grandfather calculating in his head. Soft mutters and faint sucking of teeth. Turning the corner into a slash of wind. My eyes sting with rain. Grandfather grunts. I think of him at night in the speckled brown chair worn smooth on the arms, with his feet up in tired slippers and the talking book on the phonograph. White hair in thinning strands, shoulders slumped. Me crouching behind the sofa, soft-tuning the radio to forbidden rock and roll. Dead nights in Swedish parlors, with a clock ticking and Mormor in the kitchen. For treats, a glass of eggnog. Mormor reading out evening news and sharing the parlor's silence. Mormor packing the cardboard boxes and toting up the day's receipts. Driving the Chevrolet, perched up high and peering so she can see out over the windshield. A tiny woman, stooped and hunched with age and aggravated injuries. Grandfather silent, sucking on his teeth, dreaming back the years before the darkness fell. Me vowing never to go blind, never to tramp the streets of an indifferent city, begging the attention of gaping strangers. Never to sell or have to try to sell, vowing aloofness, vowing a better way. The smell of Swedish meatballs and cooking potatoes hanging over the kitchen, the clock ticking. But now it is Saturday in the rain and my shoes squish on the grassy verge. Up the steps, ring the bell, smiling. Nothing. Down the steps, up the next, smiling. A box of birthday cards, a decorative spoon, down the steps. Grandfather stumbling and coming aright. Grandfather leaning heavily on my shoulder as I see him on his days alone, cane tapping along the sidewalk like a metronome beating out a rhythm of need. Down the steps, up another, no thank you. Down the steps. How do I know you're blind, she says. Grandfather silent but holding the smile. Streets repeat. The wind shifts. Rain at our back pushing us forward. Grandfather's hand tucked inside my arm. mottled skin and thin curling hairs along the knuckle where he grips, tight, with a firmness that bonds like glue. The box at my side is dragging. Evening is miles away. Grandfather sighs. Up, down, smiling. Make the pitch. Never pressure. Afterwards, in the car on the way home, Grandfather sucks on his teeth and counts the money. Does the calculations in his head, muttering softly as he counts. And then at the end, with every penny accounted for, he leans back to where I sit on the back seat and stretches his hand out towards mine. 85, he says. Shows his teeth in that tight, fixed smile, like something remembered from a distant past. I take the coins held between his thumb and forefinger, 3 quarters and a dime. Then I sit way back on the old cloth seat and send my mind off on its fancies, willing it away from the gutter-slick streets, away from the plain black Chevrolet, away from Mormer, my tiny Swedish grandmother perched on pillows so she can see out over the top of the steering wheel, away from the repeating avenues of bungalows and back alleys, away to wherever I can find a jump. And then the end is, the last piece is the bonus track, and that's where you got to hit them with something that they have not yet seen. We've got there as one story, but it's almost 50 pages long. In my head, it's kind of a novella, but Joel, you can tell me where the dividing line is.
It's a novella.
It's a novella. All right, thank you. We have the definitive word there. So we have a novella in the bonus track, and again, I'm just going to give you a short slice out of that, and then we'll be done with this. I'm reading section 3, so the story's already underway. So if there's a couple things you kind of go, what is that referring to? Well, we talked about that in section 1 or 2. All right, section 3. So if you want to start it and tell it right, where do you begin? With Walker and the wound that never healed? Do I need to recount the parable of the rock and the sand? How about Chaz? Was he a streetwise mercenary from the dark side, or just another dupe? Was Ariane really the good witch she claimed to be, or the most evil woman I'd ever known? The choices are endless, and none more important than the one we faced that night in the Bristol flat so many years ago. But before Bristol, there was Glastonbury Tor. And before the Tor was London, and further back was Spain. Surely Celeste was part of all that happened. Pushed to its extreme, the web might cover all the world, and for that matter, all of time. But that is absurd, and in any case untellable. Choices must be made. It started on the steps of the Roundhouse on a cool London evening in the summer of '72. The Jeff Beck group had just finished playing its farewell gig to a sweated mass of screaming heathens, and I was outside, gulping air, when down the steps came Walker, naked to the waist and bumping out the refrain to I Ain't Superstitious. I just stood there grinning. When he saw me, he gave a whoop and threw his sparkle-dot sequin shirt down in my face. "Michael, my man," he said, "you made it. Where's Celeste?" "Still in Spain," I said. "Still in Spain? With Victor? You saw it coming, you know you did." "Yeah, but I never figured." "Shit." He looked around out over the crowd. "Your card said meet here, that's all. I didn't realize." "Forget it," I said. "Not your problem." "Hey, did that band cook or what?" "Like a hot plate on overload," said Walker. "But look, I mean, what is this about for you? You gonna stay in London or what?" His hair hung wet along his face. A rivulet of sweat ran down his ribcage onto his hand-tooled belt. "Whatever happens, I'm a free man now," I put on my company smile. "Damn," he said, "how long were you together? 3 years? 4. He was nodding already. "Of course, in Spencer's party, senior year." He looked out over the crowd again, then swiveled back to me. "Did you hitch up?" "Yeah, only took 3 days. Even had a bath in Calais." "Not bad. Took me 5. I've only been here a week or so." "You got a place to crash?" I tossed him back his sparkly shirt and rolled up the sleeves of my own to cover the patched elbows. "I'm kipping down in a guy's car." "Kipping down? You sound like a native." We were on the street now, edging through the crowd flow. Walker hung the shirt around his neck, still pivoting his head. "Name of Chaz," he said, and then he punched me in the arm. There he is now. A black Morris Minor with a battered front fender was idling at the curb. Walker hopped in the front and motioned me towards the back seat. I swung in onto a stack of newspapers and a half-rolled sleeping bag that smelled like it had been used for cat litter. Walker was doing introductions, shooting rapid fire in the sideways manner that always made me think of gangsters. He had a new pair of tinted glasses with purple tones that matched his shirt. "We're going to the West Country tomorrow," he said. "Stonehenge, Glastonbury, all the psychic sites. Might even check out Ike. Remember the guy I met in Delphi?" "Gonna trip out fine," said Chaz. His grin was lopsided. That wasn't a very good British accent. Go to trip out fine, said Chaz. His grin was lopsided and bent further by the drooping edges of his handlebar mustache. He wore his hair rough and slightly long. Nothing like Walker's shoulder-length locks, but scruffy enough to look lived in. The whole car looked decidedly lived in. Come on along, said Walker. He leaned over the back seat. Got enough mescaline for 3. You sure that's cool with Chaz? Anything's cool with Chaz. Besides, said the man himself, your mate here tells me you're an history buff. You can give us the details, what we're seeing. You're the local boy, I said. Don't you want to lead the tour? Chaz's grin went flat. What you mean, local boy? Walker been telling you something? No way. All I meant was your English, right? Tell by your accent. Hey, said Chaz. He turned around square in the seat. I'm nobody, got that? Just Chaz, not from around here. He's on the run, said Walker. That's enough of that, said Chaz. We're all running from something. He pulled out into traffic. That's what we got. Thanks everybody for coming out. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. And if you've thought of questions for Joel, I bet we could get him to pop back up here and attempt some answers himself. Yes, Kathleen.
In your book about the pharaohs and in your Tinker's Dam, was that the first book?
Yes.
Yeah.
Published by Whistling Shade
Thank
Press,
you.
Joel's
Thank you.
Press. Yes.
Anyway, you have both a combination of drama and plot in, let's say, philosophical theology or theological philosophy.
Yeah.
Do you find, does that thread come up in these stories again?
You know, yes, it does. You know, the title is Wrestling with Angels. One of the first road trips
Give me a
recorded
clue.
is back in Genesis 32 when Jacob is heading off and he has an overnight stop and wrestles with an unknown personage that may be an angel or maybe even something more than that. But I like the idea that all of us experience crossroads and decisions in our lives. And we sometimes we talk about people, oh, they're so-and-so, they're wrestling with their demons. And we think of, you know, somebody who's struggling with really bad stuff and trying to fight their way around it. And I've thought of the fact that a lot of us are really wrestling with maybe more of our higher selves, like we're being called to something and maybe not addressing that call. And I thought of the many times in which characters come to some sort of crossroads, a decision place, and what happens. And in the different 18 stories, in some cases, they make some pretty clever choices and some pretty foolish choices. And what spins out from there. But to me, how you walk through life without acknowledging the higher powers and the supernatural is just beyond me. But read some of the stories, you'll see kind of what I'm getting at. Do you have a question?
Yeah. You had said one book was about guys traveling down the Nile.
Yeah.
Have you done that?
Yes. I mean, what I write about is the stuff that happened to me. And these are stories. They're made, I mean, I take what really happened and change it around. So there isn't any story in here that is exactly the way things happen. Although that middle piece you heard jumping off, that's me at 8 years old. That's about as straight as I can remember. But most of the time you're seeing, well, this happened, and you go, you know, what if we hadn't made it safely to shore? Or what if we'd taken that right-hand turn right before we saw the gunfight at the end of the road, that kind of a thing. And so you kind of wonder what there might be out there. And I just would add, since you heard a piece of it, that in the House of Mr. Pooh, this was just based on hanging out on some islands off the coast of Thailand. And on one of the islands we went to there were the Poohs. They had like 3 little A-frames on the beach, and that was the only place you could stay on the island. And the next island over were a couple of people I won't mention, but they're the voices coming up the path where we stopped off. And all I did was take those 2 places and see what would have happened if those people would have come together instead of being on 2 different islands, and then things play out from there. Joel.
Did you have a mystical experience at Glastonbury Tour? Describe.
If you keep reading that story, yes, absolutely. I don't know if anybody knows about Glastonbury Tour, but if you're at all into King Arthur or Camelot or legends like that, Avalon is where Glastonbury Tor is. The whole area around there, Glastonbury Tor is up on a high spot that was the island. The marsh beds have since sunk down, and so it's just a hillock. But check out Glastonbury Tor. Go up there and tell me how you can not have a mystery.
Add into bucket list.
Yeah, sure. There you go. Hey, if people stick around, you have individual questions, I'm happy to answer them, and I bet Joel is too. Dave, over to you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Dave.
I'll be happy to sign books and awesome.
All right. Thank you very much.
Great. All right.